Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Allison Portnow-Lathrop and I'm the head of public programs at the Ackland Art Museum. Thank you for joining us tonight for our author conversation with Stephanie Burt, the kickoff event for our NEA Big Read at the Ackland. I'd like to go over a few technical aspects of this virtual program before we get started. First, all of our audience members have their audio and video off throughout the talk. That being said, we welcome your interaction in the chat function where you can share your thoughts with the panelists, and through the Q&A function where you can ask questions that you'd like to be answered by our panelists later in the program. Tonight, we are providing live closed captioning in English. You can turn this on or off by pressing the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll give you a few seconds to find that option. And you may need to click the little more 3 dots to find that, but feel free to send us a chat if you need help troubleshooting that. So the NEA Big Read at the Ackland is organized in partnership with the Chapel Hill Public Library and Carolina Public Humanities at UNC-Chapel Hill. NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. The NEA Big Read at the Ackland is presented in connection with an installation at the Ackland, currently virtual, called Close Looks, featuring a selection of artworks examined using a variety of voices, perspectives, approaches, and resources. And during the academic year, this year, 2020-2021, Close Looks will focus on works of art that engage with the construction of racial and LGBTQIA+ identities. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers, Jacob Lau and Stephanie Burt. Jacob Lau is an assistant professor in women's and gender studies at UNC-Chapel Hill and the director of the Sexuality Studies program. Lau writes on trends of color temporalities and affects in literature, film, and archival ephemera through women of color, feminist, and post-colonial epistemologies, as well as queer of color critique. Along with Cameron Partridge, he is the co-editor of Michael Dillon's 1962 trans memoir, Out of the Ordinary, A Life of Gender and Spiritual Transitions, for which they also co-authored an introduction to the text. His writing has appeared in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Graduate Journal of Social Science, TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly, and Feral Feminisms. Stephanie Burt is the author of 3 poetry collections, Belmont, Parallel Play, and Popular Music, and several collections of critical works. Her essay collection, Close Calls with Nonsense, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her other awards include Don't Read Poetry, or other works, I should say, Don't Read Poetry, Advice from the Lights, which of course we're all reading together, The Poem Is You, 60 Contemporary American Poets and How to Read Them, The Art of the Sonnet, Something Understood, Essays and Poetry for Helen Bendler, The Forms of Youth, Adolescence, and 20th Century Poetry, Parallel Play, Poems, and Randall Jarrell on W.H. Auden, and Randall Jarrell and His Age. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, the London Review of Books, the Times Literary Supplement, the Believer, and the Boston Review. So I'd like to hand things off to Jacob now to begin and remind you all to join in the conversation by sharing thoughts and questions in the chat and Q&A boxes. So Jacob.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And welcome, Stephanie. We are so delighted that you could join us tonight to discuss your book, Advice from Lights, and some of the other work that you've done as well. I am really honored to be in conversation with you. And I think especially in this time of COVID and separation, the importance of poetry and particularly reading your book for tonight was almost like a giant warm hug. So I'm excited to have other folks who experience this work if they haven't read it yet. So welcome. I just thought I'd give a little overview of maybe some of the things we could discuss. Of course, this is your show, so however you would like to proceed, I will be very happy. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this collection in relation to your larger body of work, particularly following Belmont. And then maybe because you wear many hats, professor, literary critic, as well as poet. Maybe talk a little bit about how each of those hats informed this collection.
I'm looking around to see whether any of my other hats are in the office right now, but I think it's just a lot of comic books and only one hat right now. Sorry.
That's
Yeah, no, those are good questions. And I would like to think that Advice is a book that leads not only from the last book but to the next ones. There is a book that came out this year that is sort of fake translations and semi-translations and real translations of the ancient Greek poet Kalemikus. Um, and then, unless Grey Wolf stops liking me, I actually owe them any minute now. I think I won't be able to put it together till after the election because who can concentrate? But the skeleton or the torso of what's going to be the next book. And Advice is a book that I put together out of what I briefly thought would be a couple of small books or possibly two different books. There was an actual chapbook that came out, I think, in 2015 called All Season Stephanie that had most of the poems from the book and then a number of poems that didn't get picked up for the full length, that had Stephanie in the title, that were memory poems of an imagined girlhood, right? Of the life that I did not get to lead as a girl because no one knew I was a girl for a while, not even me. But, you know. And then there's another series in the book of poems that have years in the title that are organized around actual childhood and teen memories. Then there are some translations of Kalemikus that blew up into the next book. There are a lot of poems that are talking object poems or talking animal poems, where I'm speaking from the perspective of non-human speakers. And then towards the end, there are other kinds of meditative poems on public matters that sort of try to grope for a we more than an I. Most of the book, not all of the book, has something to do with childhood and adolescence and something to do with queer identity and trans identity. And it is, of course, a coming out book. It is a book about announcing your queerness and your femininity. Since I was assigned male at birth, that means announcing my transness to the world and to the other characters within the poems. And the poems are poems that are, I hope, full of characters. Yeah. That is something that I was doing over the years in which I was writing the poems. I kind of came out in slow motion. And the cis people in my life, except for those who knew me the best, like my partner, were surprised in the mid 20-teens to find out that I was trans and had been writing trans poetry all along. And I was surprised that they were surprised. The first poem in my first book says, "If I were a girl," 3 times. I didn't think I was being subtle about it, but it was poetry, so no one noticed, or something. Right. And Belmont, which was a book I was very happy with when it came out, now strikes me as a really sad book. So I was trying really hard to be a good parent and to be a good sort of bourgeois adult citizen at the time. And I hope that I'm, still trying hard to be a good parent. It's maybe, easier in a number of ways. But Belmont was a book about trying to occupy a role that I couldn't really completely occupy and stay myself, and just trying really frickin' hard. And when that book came out in 2013, I got asked questions about fatherhood. And, fair enough, that's how I was trying to live. And the poems about how hard that was that were in that previous book were actually about, trying to be a good mom, right? And I hope I'm still trying to be a good mom, but it's a lot easier when people say, "Oh, we see that you're trying to be a good mom," instead
Right.
of saying you're trying to be a good dad and me just wanting to hit things.
Right.
Which I didn't. I just played a lot of loud music, which I still do. I recommend it. There are parenthood poems and advice.
Yeah.
I think the parenthood poems in Belmont are some of the happiest ones, and I really love being a parent
Mhm.
now that I can do it as the mom that I am. So it is a book about coming out. What it is not is a book about finding community. The characters, including the kids in advice, long for queer community and they don't have it yet. Sometimes they can imagine it, sometimes they can't even imagine it.
Mhm.
And they long for the validation, sometimes the erotic validation, sometimes just the social validation of their peers. And mostly they don't have that yet either. And frankly, that's the next book.
Okay.
Um,
I was going to ask you actually about that.
no, I can, I mean, if you want, I've got a screen in front of me. I can go in and look. If you want, I can spend, part of our evening together reading a couple of the new poems, which many have appeared in magazines, some have not. And they tend to be poems about imagining and finding and supporting a community.
Mhm.
And they're also full of in jokes and Easter eggs about X-Men comics. Because one of the things that I discovered was that I wasn't going to find the queer and trans community that I was looking for just within the poetry world, as much as I like the poetry world. And I wasn't going to find it by going out clubbing,
Mhm.
because that's not me.
Mhm.
Um, and it turns out that a good deal of the trans and queer community that I was looking for was in arts communities that have different structures because they're constructed around around nerdy art, around kinds of art that create non-realist narratives, around science fiction, and honestly around X-Men comics. And if there are people around here who have X-Men questions, um,
Some of my students who may be tuning in tonight are going to be very excited because we end up talking about pop culture and the X-Men quite
yeah,
a bit.
are you yourself an X fan?
I am. Maybe this is a bit of a divergence, but
Not though. It's
okay.
who's with which mutant do you most identify?
Wolverine. I've been Wolverine for
Wait,
Halloween. I don't know how many
Logan.
times. So
You mean Logan? Because there are two Wolverines.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Logan,
that's great.
nothing else. Yeah.
That's
Uh-huh.
great. That's great. I'm gonna have to read you if we get to it. There's a poem that's got a whole bunch of Laura Kinney uh,
Oh,
jokes.
all right.
Laura Kinney, for those listening along at home, is also Wolverine. She is a clone of Logan, um, and they are both rather good trans rap.
Mhm.
Do you find yourself explaining the trans masculinity of Logan to people who didn't see it at all, and you're like, "How could you not see that?"
Yeah, totally. The whole regeneration, the feeling kind of eternally young, which also surfaces right in your advice from the lights, which I was just like the perpetual being 14 feeling,
Yep.
um, and kind of the like gruff, short, scruffy masculinity I totally identify with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Science
And look,
experiment.
the painstaking, decades long, and gradually successful to construct a version of masculinity that is unambiguously masculine, that is binary,
Mhm.
but non-toxic.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the term Wolverining?
I have not. No, actually.
Okay, I want to popularize this term. It was coined by the one of my closest collaborators in non poetry matters, the young adult novelist Rachel Gold, whose
Hmm.
books I want everyone to read. To Wolverine as a verb is to do the things that Logan does, which is to say, to be a visibly trans or queer adult who takes care of a distressed young queer or trans person and serves as an appropriate kind of mentor figure and protector in ways that don't extend to actual parenthood, that aren't giving them a grade, and they're never creepy, but that are just, here's this person needs some sympathy and some protection from an adult, and they haven't had it, and here I am.
I love that. That
And I
is,
have pause. Yeah.
that is a very particular kind of Logan masculinity, and like this relationship of kind of a pseudo parental kind of queer parent in a way.
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah.
That's right. And speaking as Kate Pride,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
have appreciated that when I've found it, and have tried to provide it. Interesting. This is in fact not a digression at all. This is what we're supposed to be talking about. And I do think we're supposed to pivot back to some of the poetry at this point.
Yes.
It's probably too early for me to read some new poems.
Okay. Um,
I'm not sure how much reading of poetry we should be doing here, as opposed to answering questions about it. And I think you had more questions, and you are welcome to ask them.
Yeah. So I kind of want to have you talk a little bit about the sequence of poems and kind of how that plays with memory, identity, affect, and especially time or temporality, right? I love the ways in which you discuss in one poem feeling sedimented, right? And that especially as a young person in regards to I think the boys in that poem are likened to um, uh, rock that is like hardened by fire, and you are
Oh,
cemented.
I think that's like my 1985, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think I need to find it. Here it is. Um, should I read the poem? Should I
Sure.
just read the poem to people?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, my 1985. I wasn't the math star, but one or two of my new friends were. I liked to work into casual conversation fusillades of words like nexus and tensor. The counselor from the Department of Recreation said I had the voice of an angry 30-year-old. I thought I had a penetrating gaze. Kids thought I was staring at them. I had to be told. After that, I imagined I lived on the moon for 2 days. I stood out and hid there, a demented sentry from an awkward or parallel world, a young bizarro. On our class trip to the beach and the world of tomorrow, the boys were igneous. I was sedimentary. I set out to lie with the other girls on the low dunes before the morning heat got metamorphic. They folded their towels and moved off, so I closed my eyes on the hypothesis that it would make me calmer. In the talent show, I played piano for Annabelle's show tunes. We rehearsed extra for passages marked improvise. Then sang Take a Pebble by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They thought I was caterwauling. I thought I was Orphic. So yeah, awkward trans childhood, awkward childhood. Um, the greater opportunities for socialization, however awkward, and the availability of larger groups, and the falling away of expectations that everybody would socialize in same gender groups,
Mm-hmm.
um, is one of the things that made real life eighth grade for me the last year that just sucked completely, and ninth grade the first year that didn't. Um, it took me a while to figure out why it was so odd that I liked my teens a lot better than I liked my childhood. At the same time, I was aware and I am aware of the neat childhood things that a lot of people have and had, and I think they're great. And some of them I had back then, like time to read, uh, which I recognize as a artifact of middle class privilege. Not all children have it. And many of the childhood things that I wanted and didn't have are things that I have now.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and the jokes about rocks in there are part of my general habit of using double meanings and puns on rhyme words where possible. I like rhyme. I think American poets, I want to say don't use it enough, but it means I have less competition.
Mhm.
I like using rhyme. It's fun. Um, and, it's a series of double meanings, right? Like the boys are igneous because they tend to erupt. Both they're emotionally volatile because it's a group of boys who are 13 and 14, and it's a dick joke about volcanic eruptions. And I wasn't like that and didn't have a lot in common with them. And wanted to fit into the sand so that I could be in the company of girls who, of course, just because you want to hang out with people doesn't mean they want to hang out with you, especially when you're 13. And of course, I wanted to turn into somebody else.
Right. I think that that metaphor, particularly, and your play on words there with the sedimentation, fits so much with, I think, how folks in trans studies have described this feeling of gender sedimentation, the kind of simultaneous um, desire to, in kind of this binary world, fit in and let out kind of this invisible self that's kind of haunting your childhood or your adolescence, right? Um, I I be one of the things that I kind of uh, the book that I co-edited on Michael Dillon has this one scene where he is an adolescent and
Mm-hmm.
assigned female at birth, and he goes to a park and he's going home with this boy, and the boy opens the gate and kind of ushers him in, and he's like, what are you doing? We're two chaps together here. And it is this kind of moment of feeling kind of beside himself, right? There's this self that you understand, and then it's like, oh, the visible reading of my body is not this kind of self that this interaction should be going differently, right? Both with for you on the beach, and then for Dylan when he's walking through this gate. And I think you mentioned that this is a very lonely work, and then your next one will be more about finding community. But
Yeah.
I feel especially at the title poem, "Advice from the Lights," really has that feeling.
Yeah, that's a really sad poem. I don't think this is a sad book. This is supposed to be a fun book. It's got a lot of frustrations, but it's supposed to have a lot of fun in it. It's just that the consciousnesses, the personae in it, are moving towards community they haven't found yet.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, the title poem is one of the poems about adulthood, though. The title poem is one of the poems about the way that achieving power and security can cut you off from community.
Mhm.
And being taken care of and seen as a child by adults can also cut you off from community. And you know, you don't want to go through all of your life being either a teacher among students or a child among adults.
Mhm.
And we are now going to have another discussion about Kate Pride
Okay.
because you know what she's doing now, right?
I don't actually.
She's a pirate queen, and she
What?
finally got to kiss a girl on panel.
Yay, finally.
Finally, I'm really tempted to screen share, but that might be a little too niche for this audience. But yeah, I don't think it's a peculiarly trans experience. I think you can find it in Auden.
Mm.
Um, I don't feel as close to Auden's poetry as I used to, but I feel close to a lot of the personae in the poems. And one of the things that you see in Auden is someone who's always either a child among adults or a teacher among students and does not like it. He wants peers.
Mhm.
And he wants peers to do things that have been categorized as immature with, which for Auden means gay sex.
Mhm.
Because Auden, the early Auden never gets himself entirely out of the post-Freudian point of view that says that queerness is immaturity.
Mhm.
And in a way it is. And I'm okay with that. If queerness is immaturity, then maturity is something that I don't want.
Right.
But if maturity means taking responsibility for the consequences of your actions, keeping your word, and being responsible toward the vulnerable, then that sounds great. Sign me up.
Absolutely. Yeah, this kind of idea of this delayed childhood, this delayed adolescence with the queer, there's been so many connections to those things. I can think of, Jack Halberstam's In a Queer Time and Place, thinking about, always being seen as never quite progressing along a kind of
That's
cis.
right. That's right. Or Catherine Bon Stockton.
Mhm. Yeah.
Who that's a weird book because the examples in that book are not the ones that I would use, but I love the overall argument about queerness as a failure to grow up.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I feel like we should spell. Can the audience members see the chat, or is it just the panelists?
I think they should.
Because if the audience can see the chat, then we should put the names of the queer theory and queer studies books that we're recommending in the chat.
Yeah, we should.
So if you want to read current XMen comics and see what Kate Pryde is up to, the title you want to read is Marauders, 2019 to 20. If you want to support the non-men who are currently writing X comics, you want to be looking for the comics writers Vita Ayala, Leah Williams, and I'm going to put in two more names, Teenie Howard, and you want to look for recent comics by Sean and McGuire, who isn't currently writing X comics, but that could change. Jacob just recommended Jack Halberstam's book In a Queer Time and Place, and Jack Halberstam has written other books since then, including one about Lady Gaga,
Yeah.
which really leans hard into the idea that queer liberation is immaturity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fun book. I have some problems with some of the ways that the arguments are in there, but it's a lot of fun. And then I'm recommending, with some reservations, a very academic but very carefully argued book by Catherine Bon Stockton it's just called Queer Childhoods?
On Growing Sideways, I believe.
Thank you. Yeah, Growing Sideways, like on the impossibility of queer childhood. Thank you. So that's a good book that I ask graduate students to read who are doing weird things. Lindsay, thank you for forwarding what I'm putting in the chat to everybody, because you have the power to do that. I can keep reading poems, but I think you have more questions.
I do. However, if there's certain poems you want to get us into, that would be absolutely fine with me.
I can read one more poem from Advice.
Okay. Yeah.
You don't. It's slightly frustrating when you go to hear a concert by a band that's been touring for a year and a half, and you want to hear the album because that's what you're listening to at home, and then it's just, I'm going to play some new songs. Like, that's not a concert you want to be part of. So the poems at the end of this book were begun or completed in New Zealand after the election of 2016, thinking about what it meant to have a kleptocratic racist with a wrecking ball put in charge of the country that I'm from and that I expected to go back to. And this is one of those poems. And some people watching might not know that Rock Creek Park is a very large piece of federal parkland in Washington, D.C. That is mostly in its forest state. Advice from Rock Creek Park. What will survive us has already begun. Oak galls, two termites' curious, self-perpetuating bodies, letting the light through the gaps. They lay out their allegiances under the roots of an overturned tree. Almost always better to build than to wreck. You can build in a wreck. Under the roots of an overturned tree. Consider the marten that hefts herself over traffic cones. Consider her shadow misaligned over parking lot cement, saran wrapped scrap in her beak. Nothing lasts forever, not even the future we want. The president has never owned the rain. And we now know how little the current president owns, and how much debt he has, and we'll see. It is one of, if you are, let's say, a helicopter pilot who is removing someone from, let's say, a large white house because he is no longer entitled to occupy that house. The path of your helicopter might pass over Rock Creek Park. Also, vote.
Yeah.
Vote early if you can. Vote early in person if you can. Vote early absentee if you can't. Vote.
Absolutely.
And reminder to people who might be watching this in states that are not contested at the state level, there are always down ballot races, and some down ballot races are always close. Moving on.
Stephanie, I was curious, partly because this is a 2017 collection, how much of this book you actually wrote after the election, and how much was kind of, I know that every book has multiple beginnings, right? Especially a poetry collection, but
yeah, most of it, I mean, there are poems, and there were poems that are, as with, I think, most poets, there are poems that, wrote, and some of them I published, and then I was just like, yeah, this isn't so great, and removed. I was moving poems in and out of the book right up to the point where we had to hit publish. Most of it was written before the election. This is a book that went to press in February 2017 that Jeff and everybody at Grey Wolf accepted in, I think, early 2016, with the understanding that it would change. And most of the book was written before the election. Most of the poems that were either begun or completed afterwards are the poems in part 5 that are about public matters.
I know we're starting to get close to the time of Q&A, larger Q&A, but I was
loving the time of Q&A. Sorry.
Yeah. The time of Q&A, yes. But I was really struck by your After Kalemikus poem about why you write, about kind of the process of that, because I kind of want to get us into this kind of your artistic process, and how that how that came about in particular, or how that informed this particular collection.
Yeah, so Kalemikus, who is an ancient Greek poet, and I've had little slices of translations from Kalemikus in several of my books, and it has since turned into an entire book that came out this year, called After Kalemikus. He was an ancient Greek poet who thought a lot about who was reading him and why, and who he was writing for, and what he'd been reading. And he's normally thought of as a very self-conscious literary writer. If you are going to ancient Greek literature for the unfiltered, archaic, authentic voice of the people, he is not where you go. He's someone who's very conscious of himself as a latecomer.
Mhm.
And I would argue in modern terms as a queer latecomer and as a self-consciously multicultural and almost certainly very dark-skinned latecomer who's got access to a lot of earlier poetry and a lot of stories that he uses to make his own poems. And the capital R romantic argument for why do I write, you find it in Keats's letters, and it's nothing to sneeze at, is that you write for yourself. Keats says, I would write my poetry even if I knew it was going to be taken away and burned and no one would ever get to see it at the end of each night. I don't feel that way. And I also don't think I'm writing for a public. Walt Whitman sometimes seemed to be writing for America, but Walt Whitman also sometimes seemed to be writing for the individuals out there who would get what he was trying to say.
Mhm.
To imagine or bring into being a kind of companionship, a kind of channel, a kind of communication, a kind of soul sharing, if you like, that seems trivial if you're not someone who wants it or needs it. But that seems quite important if you're someone who do, and that can come into existence through surprising or apparently trivial means. And Kalemikus thinks about his own poetry in Greek sometimes as fun. It's supposed to be fun, and also as the sharing of joys and secrets and sorrows that might seem trivial to others, but is quite important to him.
Mhm.
I can read that poem if you like.
I would actually.
Okay. It is the people from Princeton University Press were very good about letting me reuse. Where is it? Letting me reuse poems from my Grey Wolf book, in this collection of all the Kalemikus stuff. Hang on, that's not right. So I'm going to read to you from after Kalemikus, then we can get back to advice and look at some new poems. I'm on page 138. Yeah. And so this is a version of Kalemikus' fragment 714. Why do I write? Experience and scientific evidence agree. An otherwise intolerable load of shame decreases by up to 6% if told to even a temporary companion through a folded up page at recess, a performance on classical guitar, a palinode, a tumbler, or a hash mark on a tree. Fears diminish, at least a little, whenever secrets are no longer secrets and enter the common atmosphere, even as birdsong, even in code. So, yeah. Sharing.
Mhm.
I like poems that attempt to share things. I like the idea of sharing. And sometimes it's public sharing, and sometimes it's quiet or more private or more intimate sharing.
Yeah, that poem really struck me as this, right, the multiple ways in which disclosing secrets and the relief of that, no matter the form, right? It was just such a beautiful, beautiful poem. Since as you say, this is kind of a lonelier collection, but this kind of moment of in code, in disclosure,
Yeah.
in Tumblr post, right? And anyway,
I
yeah.
don't think that advice is lonelier than my earlier collections. I think it's lonelier than my next collection,
Mm.
which is gonna, I hope, have a lot of representations of community. I hope advice is a fun book to read.
Mm. Oh yeah. It is. It is that. But
Yay!
I love. Speaking of fun, I really loved Secondhand Flashlight.
Oh, thank you. I'm always afraid that poem is too long, but it was so much fun, and it's
Yeah.
it's also full of sex jokes.
Yep.
Should I read that one?
I kind of want you to. We're
I,
almost out of time, but
um, I'll read it and then maybe Q&A time. Let me find it. It's one of the last talking object poems in the book. It is in Terza Rima, which is a fairly a fun rhyme scheme that links three-line stanzas to one another and is strongly associated with Dante's Divine Comedy, where he goes to hell and then he goes to purgatory and then he goes to heaven. Secondhand flashlight. If you're listening to this outside North America, you can think of it as secondhand torch or secondhand electric torch. I have no say over who or what turns me on. Only the power to make things clear as day, or at least as a truculent dawn. Once a girl brought me to a rave. I was dizzy, then giddy, then woke up near dead on a lawn. When I look back to my origins, I crave that chastity, that darkness, but not yet. I also scare skunks off and represent ways to look brave. I can render the same silhouette gargantuan or gaunt or shake and make it dance a minuet. It's you who choose what I appear to flaunt. When all the people around me are fully aware of whatever is in front of their faces, where all their acquaintances are, and how to find loose change they think they lost, I sleep in my drawer. I prove I am worth the $1.50 I cost when the power goes out, and at parties with nothing else that can distract a preschool guest or coax shy grown-ups from their shells. I might be the first thing a kid ever put together. I do just what my battery compels. Unlike my big brother, the limelight, and my cousin, the campfire, I prefer inconsequence. Though famous in culverts and attics, I would rather play no role in public events. I have never, can never run wild, obtuse, hollow-bodied, confined to the present tense. I'll be your lightsaber if you are a child, though first and last I do no harm. In bad dreams I see miles of anthracite burn. In my best I keep somebody warm. Sunlight, to me, is just something I get shut off in. Having resigned myself to my fixed form, I was surprised to escape the cardboard coffin of the charity shop that sold me. Though none of my parts can soften, the humid summer air can still corrode me. Pick me up, test me every so often, hold me. And I'm realizing the kind of mid-Atlanticism, the sort of slightly ridiculous Anglophilia that informs the English that I, as an American with an American accent, insist on speaking, sort of pops up a couple times in that poem. A charity shop is an Anglophile name for what in America we would call a secondhand shop or a thrift shop. And of course, hold me as a full rhyme with corrode me in parts of the English speaking world that I'm not actually from and don't live in currently. But I hope that Americans like it too.
Oh,
And Canadians for whom it's also not, they're not full rhymes, but hold me. And it is also a very trans poem. It's a poem about wanting to be something other than a desexualized object for use, but also enjoying the ways in which, even before you're out to yourself, you can accomplish things in other parts of your life, that you can be useful for adults and for kids.
Yeah.
But
Multiple piece was something that I was just like, this is so brilliant. And
Thank
the
you.
lightsaber,
Thank you.
For loose change and the party tricks and all these different things. And especially that moment where you compare the secondhand flashlight to the limelight and the campfire.
Thank you. Thank you. Given that there's 80s childhood elsewhere in the book, it's at least possible that that's a Rush joke, a joke about the band Rush. There are various Easter eggs and references built into that poem that it's perfectly fine if you're not recognizing, but that make it more fun for me, and I hope contribute to the resonance that the words have.
Mhm.
Um, and
Well, we didn't quite get to all of the music that is worked into this book, but
oh yeah, there's a lot of music.
yeah,
Yeah.
the references to Taylor Swift, right?
Yes.
The Cars and all these. So maybe some of our audience members will ask questions about that, but um, we should probably pivot to some Q&A real quick, some larger Q&A.
You
Yes.
mean Q&A from people who aren't you?
Right.
Okay, yeah.
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 Well,
Um,
I'm happy to invite the audience to stick their questions into the Q&A box now. And actually, I was going to ask about music to start things off. When I
okay.
started reading Advice from the Lights, immediately I thought about it as sort of listening to an album for the first time. Like there are the
Thank you.
poems that you just like they knock the wind out of you and you have to listen to them or read them 3 times in a row. So I wondered how, when you were putting together the book as a whole, did you think like the poems were written, I'm assuming not in the order in which they appear in the
No, no.
publication, but how did
Uh,
you think about putting them back together like you would put together an album?
yeah, it is. It's like an album or like a radio show.
Yeah,
I don't know how much radio you've done. Uh, but yeah. I think of putting together a collection, which I'm still not sure I know how to do very much. Like you're making a mixtape, you're putting together a double album, you are compiling a radio show, and you want to think about what comes after what, and what makes a good segue, and where you want to put the highest energy things, and how you build to something, and where you take a break and back announce. This is one of the reasons all my collections have sections in them. Is there's an analogy with honestly with radio, with doing radio. You play a set and then you stop and you announce and then you start your other set, and the sets have internal organizations. And I've never been a party DJ or a club DJ. You don't want me DJing your party. I'm not enough fun. But a thing that club DJs think about, that good radio DJs for non-classical music also think about. Um, And I suppose if you were doing an entire set of like leader or chamber pieces that were 3 minutes long, you'd think about it also. But like if you're a classical DJ and you're programming symphonies, it's a different thing. But if you're doing a set of song like music, you think about what goes with what should come after what belongs together. And there's an early childhood set, there are teen years sets, there's a public life set, and most of them end with a short piece of Kalemikus. So yeah, these are constructed like radio sets, and that's exactly right.
that's great. Yeah, and no one would want me DJing either because it would be just symphonies after symphonies too.
Well, no, that's legit. Like
Sure.
we need composed music DJs. That's just a separate skill set.
It definitely. Well, we have another question from an actual audience member who wants to know, have you heard or experienced, Stephanie, that readers and critics looked at your earlier works trying to newly parse their themes after you came out? And did you find yourself reevaluating any of them?
I mean, okay, so did people who had read my work earlier go back and say, "Wow, she's trans"? Some did. Mostly it was my friends, my cis friends. Like my very closest friends knew that I felt like a girl inside, and at some point was going to have to do something about it, like from college. But people who knew me and who I liked and who I worked with, but who didn't know me as well, were like, "Oh, now I see," and I did get that. I don't know that many people had read those books. I don't know that many people have read the book now, but people who had read the earlier work and didn't know I was trans went back and said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, there she is." So that did happen. I don't know that it happened constantly because I'm not that popular. But it was mildly amusing because I sort of felt like you couldn't tell. But they couldn't tell. They weren't looking for it. They were looking for other things. So that did happen. Do I see my earlier works differently? I don't see my first two books differently, or my first two books of poetry. I also wrote some lit books. They pretty much feel the way they did when I published them. Belmont, which was the last book of poetry that I was trying to be a guy when I wrote, And by the time I finished some of the poems in that, there are coming out poems in Belmont, but they're sort of awkwardly mixed among poems that are mostly about, oh my God, I'm an adult now, I have a car, I have a house, I'm responsible for very small humans. Thank you. Yeah. Belmont is the only one of my books that really feels different now to me than when I wrote it, because it is a book full of attachments to people I'm still very attached to who are awesome, right? Like my partner now was my partner then, and my kids now were my kids then. But it's a book about trying very hard to be happy being someone who I wasn't. And it's a sad book in ways I didn't understand at the time. And it's about trying to find, and I still live in a suburb, and it's the right place for us to raise our kids. So I don't, when I say it's a book about trying to make a suburban compromise that wasn't right for me, I don't want to suggest that the suburbs are terrible and we should burn them down. But Belmont is a book about trying to be someone who I wasn't. And Advice is a book about learning as an adult to look back at and sort of redo childhood and adolescence in order to be the person I want to be. And without ditching the people who were already in my life. This moves a little bit away from questions about the books and towards questions of trans existence in general, but people who are my generation, because I'm perhaps, alas, in my late 40s, the notion of trans identity that we got growing up often was all trans people are binary. You're either a man or a woman, and I happen to be a woman. I am binary trans, but of course many people aren't. You should only transition if you have no other choice and you're a suicide risk. And when you transition, you are leaving your old life behind. Mm-hmm. And you will feel you have to ditch your old life, or the people in your old life will ditch you. And none of that is true. None of that is remotely true. But those were fears that I had when I wrote Belmont, and they were reasons for trying to be the person who was trying to be when I wrote a lot of that book. So that is, as the character says in the Monty Python film, I got better. I thought you were dead. I got better. I didn't think I was dead, though. I just realized I could do better. Mm-hmm. And I've been very lucky in terms of who I was close to then, because it's, I have expanded my range of what I want to do as a writer, and expanded my range of, friends and, intimate friends as a human. Mm-hmm. And I own a lot more XMen comics. More audience questions?
I have one that was submitted upon registration. Someone would like to know who your literary inspirations are.
So many. We can go with dead poets, alive poets, or not poets. Dead poets: Marianne Moore, Walt Whitman, Gwendolyn Brooks, Donne. Randall Jarrell. I wrote a book about him. Elizabeth Bishop. Alive poets: Terrence Hayes, Laura Kosciuszki, Paul Muldoon, Angie Estes. The wonderful, not well known enough, trans poet Kat Fitzpatrick, whose second book you should all look for. It's a Byronic narrative. People who are friends at this point: Monica Yoon, certainly. At this point, some New Zealand writers: Jenny Bornholt, Hera Lindsay Bird, Esther Ranapiri. These are people younger than me. Non-poets: George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, Chris Claremont. Maybe I'll stop there. Those are inspirations.
Thanks. Are there any other questions that folks would like to type into the chat? Yes. You've talked about your love of the X-Men. Are there any comic book series out there that combine poetry and the serial form? Ooh.
Depends what you mean by poetry.
Mm.
There are. I did a panel with the Hillary Chute, Chute, who's a great comics critic, and a couple other people for the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, or MICE, 2 years ago, where we talked about poetry and comics and the way that poetry and comics making can intersect. And you can look up the panel to see what creators came up. It should all be online. My favorite poetry is poetry. It is composed of words in lines or in musically intricate prose, and does not need pictures to go with it. Although, of course, you can illustrate it if you want. There are comics I like that are recent comics that have the interiority and the lyrical quality and the expressive quality. The sense that you're really getting inside someone's head and experiencing the beauty of how they feel. The quality that many of us look for in a lot of the poems that we read. And I would recommend, it's probably honestly my favorite 21st century literary work of any kind, although I might not say this next week, so ask me next week. A book-length graphic novel, a book-length comic called On a Sunbeam by the great comics artist Tilly Walden. Walden like Walden Pond. You can read this online unless they took it down. The whole thing is online. And Allison, if you want to find the link to that, it is book length. It is majestic. I recommend that you purchase it so you can take it to bed with you and take it with you next time you take a trip, and sit outside with no internet at all and just read it. But you will have to pay $18.99 or $15.99 or whatever for that. So in terms of comics that do the things I want poetry to do and that don't require you to learn, 50 years of superhero continuity, On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. If you can't find the site, I'll just find the site for you. Hang on. Especially since there are probably some students in here who don't necessarily have. There we go. Yeah, you can just go to onasunbeam.com and start reading. And it is about queer people and non-binary people and flying fish in space, and about negotiating multiple competing identities and loyalties. And it's a school story, and it's a lot like As You Like It, but it's a space adventure, and it is extremely satisfying and strikingly beautiful. And if you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you. And I like it as least as much as I like any book of poetry published in the past several years.
Great.
Yeah. I should recommend, since we're recommending books, my favorite book of poetry published last year, by a fairly large margin, was Terrence Hayes's American Sonnets for a Past and Future Assassin. I can't praise that book enough. It is exactly the book for our moment, and it is red hot with anger, and it is relevant. It is also technically intricate and super smart. He is if it were useful to identify a smartest and most formally inventive poet writing in English today, which it's not, but if you had to point to someone, he would be a very good person to point to, Terrence Hayes. And that's his latest book.
Well, I think we have one final question. Someone who's an educator is with us tonight and would love to know your perspective, Stephanie, on what poetry can bring to the classroom.
It depends on what classroom and what poems, right? So I've actually written about this, about written work for middle school and high school level educators that the Poetry Foundation commissioned a while ago about how to bring more poems into your classroom. And I'm going to look for that piece of advice and put it in the chat. My feelings about bringing poems into K-12 classrooms are share poems that you yourself like. Encourage students to find poems that they like and give students a choice of poems when you can. Give them 5 and say, pick your favorite, rather than saying, here's what you're going to discuss today. You can do that with poems because they're short. You can't really do it with novels. You're just stuck reading whatever novel you've assigned. Hang on, I'm still looking for that in the chat. This is it. Okay, here we go. Yeah, find poems that you like. Remember that your students are going to differ one from another and that they deserve the chance to bring in and discuss poems that they like, even if you don't like them. And remember that different poems appeal to different people or to the same people for different reasons. Your students or you may love one poem for its ridiculous wordplay and its outrageous rhymes, and another poem for its unmediated expression of outrage, and another poem still for its subtle negotiations of the mixed feelings that come with your first job or your first crush. There are a number of anthologies of poems for modern teens for classroom use. There's one that I rather like that is all contemporary called Please Excuse This Poem. I'm in it. I don't know. It's the idea is it's poems that sort of don't belong in a classroom that would mildly shock teens. And it's from a few years ago. So from the perspective of 2020, it's probably going to seem a little bit dated, a little bit millennial, and a little bit apolitical. But it's still got a whole bunch of good stuff in it. And it might be another way forward if you were a middle or high school teacher. But, give your students a, poker hand's worth of poems and say, what do you like and why? And let them lead with what they like. And if you want more of my blather about middle school and high school teachers and what you can do with poems, there's a link in the chat. If you are an early grades teacher, good for you. I loved having kids that age. That my kids are now 10 and 14, so they're not anymore. I don't know anything you don't know about poetry for second graders, but please use some. I guess the other piece of advice that I'd want to just make sure I articulate now is often kids who encounter poetry in schools find an artificial separation between writing it and reading it, and enjoy writing it and hate having to write about it because they are asked to, identify and jam it for the AP exam and know what's an Italian sonnet and know what's a Shakespearean sonnet and sort them into little piles of sonnets and then move on. Like, the only reason anyone ever cares about enjambment is that it's useful. The only reason pop songwriters ever care about a key change is that key changes can make you keep paying attention to a song, is that it's a useful part of the technique that gives you an emotional experience. So you should be connecting what they're writing to what they're reading, and you should be proceeding from the emotional experience to describing the technique, not the other way around. And for God's sake, don't go chronologically. Almost none of your students are going to enjoy Chaucer before they enjoy Langston Hughes or Adrienne Rich. If you want to go reverse chronological, you don't have to, but you can. But, meet them where they are and teach work that you like. That was a lot. Sorry. Do we have any other questions? I can take us out with one of the new poems that I promised Jacob earlier if you want.
I would love that.
Okay. I think we're going to go, if I can find it. It's going to take me a second. but I think we're going to have to go with the one that has Wolverine claws in it. And also jokes about dragons, if that's because
I'm so
yeah.
excited and all about this.
What? Okay, yeah, this is actually, oh, you know what? This is a poem that has appeared in an online magazine, and I can put the link in the chat if you want, in a magazine that I like that's been very good to me called Plume. And here we go. I hope this is going to be in the next book. And it is, wait, hang on. That's not the chat. That's people texting me. Where is my Zoom link? Here we go. It's got some X jokes. It is absolutely about Wolverining and about helping people come out. It's also got some, it is in dialogue with one of my very favorite recent novels, which is a young adult fantasy novel called Seraphina by Rachel Hartman. I'll spell it in here. It's really, I can't praise it enough. It is, I'll just tell you, it is about dragons and humans and being half dragon, and the dragons are autistic and the half dragon people are trans, and also have some complex PTSD and are dealing with how to dissociate and how to keep things in your brain that don't belong together. And they're dragons. Anyway, bleeding hearts. They do not fit their given name. They glow all day in the sun without ever opening up. They are able to retain their shape and their seal under even the weightiest rain. They may assert or believe that any problem they notice among themselves must be a low priority next to the crocuses, always picked first, or compared to the unwell maple, whose phantom limb, as recently as last summer, could provide an afternoon of unreliable shade. Their practice at holding their own has made them feel less cultivated or planted than like something they themselves have made. Nevertheless, it is tough for them to remain so sanguine. They have arranged to keep themselves together in almost the same way they keep other people's secrets, even when shaky at dawn or nearly asleep. They dangle and dodge in light wind as if they were wind chimes. They are also perennial, able to outlast frost. They can insist that the most important fact about them, more than photosynthesis or chromosomes, varietals, or Latin names, is just that they continue to exist. As well as the overfamiliar Valentine, the thumbnail spade for archaeological digs. They duplicate the alphabet, a V for victory, as well as a sort of X wherever 2 or 3 will overlap. Their bone-white, surprisingly durable extensions resemble exclamation marks, or quills, or claws. Once I heard them claim that they were eggs, dragon eggs. One day they would supposedly split, detaching the bloom from the ornamental top so that the V-shaped part would drop to earth and low to the ground observers could see the dragonettes discover their feet, their solarized scales, their yet to be sharpened pairs of retractable talons. The adults who share or repeat these stories must be not gardeners but magicians, the kind who understand how to escape from anything, whom you hope can teach you too how to do that. Some renegade botanists believe the cultivars can be regrown from even the slightest cutting, one tendril, one stem. Other experts think this trick can work for closely related species, but not for them. V for vigilance, V for vindication. After a hailstorm, either V in survived. Invisible and invisible, They are the kind of students who ought to teach but will not give lectures, having determined what parts of their own life cycle are worth trying to explain to the outer world, what to reveal from within their clusters of shoots, their extracellular architecture, and what belongs, for now, on the inside. It's weird to go back through that and wonder whether the rhyme scheme is actually working. Because I'm not sure it is. Maybe it is.
Well, thank you for sharing some of your newer work.
Anyway, that's a new poem. It's called Bleeding
Yeah.
Hearts. It's got claws. It's got trans young people who need some help. If anybody in here wants to reach out to me and ask follow-up questions, you can email me. I'm on the Harvard website. You can also follow me on Twitter, and this is me on Twitter. There are two Stephanie Burts who are active on Twitter. The other is a South Carolina-based food writer who is wonderful, who I keep trying to meet. I am on Instagram, but I don't really use it for communication. I'm kind of passive. Fine. I may as well give it. Yeah, I'm on Instagram as Not Quite Hyde Park. But Twitter's better. Are we done? Do we need to wrap up?
I think we do need to wrap up.
Okay. Go have dinner. Should I just say thank you?
I was going to say thank you to you, Stephanie, and to you, Jacob, for leading the conversation and sharing your work with us. Stephanie, it's been amazing to hear the poems from the poet's mouth. What an experience, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for all the attention. Yeah, this was really fun, and I hope that you stay in touch. I know that this is the beginning of a series of events that have me sort of in the mix at the Ackland. People call it the Ackland or the Ackland Museum?
Ackland Art Museum, yes.
The Ackland Art Museum. Please get in touch if you want, more of me, or if someone's got a question where you're like, let's ask the poet, because I'm here for that.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, we have 5 book discussions starting. The first one is Friday this week, and then going through the first week of December. So
yeah,
just register, get a book. Yeah,
register and get a book. I can't pop into discussions, but if you come up with questions to ask me, just contact me, and I'll see what I can. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It was so much fun. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you to everybody who helped set this up and everybody who came.